Hello everyone, welcome to episode 51 of the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. And this week we're going to be looking at our furry friends. Appreciate the deep and husky voice I have this morning, so yes, rather sultry, don't you think? Anyway, we're going to be looking at Red 13, Kunshira, Nono, Bobby Corwen, and Behemoth K. Okay, so Red 13 from Final Fantasy VII-R remake, you know. Anyway, he's a 2 CP backup with the text, when Red 13 enters the field, you may pay fire. If you do so, play one forward from your hand onto the field. If it leaves the field for any reason, remove it from the game instead. At the end of the turn, remove it from the game. So basically, an excellent way to be able to play a very expensive forward, or just an expensive forward, with a really good entry ability. And yeah, it's like it's being able to cast a forward as a summon, effectively, for one fire. It's so strong. Yeah, fantastic card. Anyway, some of the great cards you can play from it. Shadow. So, obviously, when Shadow enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, add one backup among them to your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. You then may play one backup of cost 2 or less from your hand onto the field. Now, this is good because, obviously, you can play Shadow to play Red 13 to then play another forward, or you can play Red 13 to play Shadow to then play another backup. Hopefully, you'll get Interceptor to come to the field as well, at which point Shadow will gain haste, be able to attack, and at the end of the turn, obviously, he gets removed from the game. But still, an excellent way to basically play 3 CP for 2 backups and what would be an 8k haste forward. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then we've got Yuffie. So when Yuffie enters the field, you may pay X. If you do so, you may search for one card named Red 13 of cost X or less and play it onto the field. So you play Yuffie, you pay 2. To get Red 13, to search them out of your deck, to then pay the 1 fire, to then play another forward out of hand. So, playing this Yuffie is a fantastic way to be able to basically pay 3 to get a backup and play another card out of your forward, out of your hand. Obviously, you need to make sure that you've got the fire open for Red 13, whilst Yuffie doesn't require any other element. Red 13 does still need the fire, so bear that in mind. Then we've got Luca. So, Earth Dull, put Luca into the break zone, choose one backup across 3 LS in your break zone, play it onto the field. Red 13 enters, you pay the fire, you then get to play a forward onto your field as well. And this can be done during your opponent's turn, even in your opponent's attack phase, something like that. So a great way to be able to play a huge forward onto the field, and thankfully Red 13 brings the forward standing up, which means that they can block or use, if it's got haste action abilities, something like that. So it's a great way to be able to cheat something onto the field. Talking of cheating things into the field, Tama. Again, a similar sort of way of doing it, but this is like Luca, but it costs you technically a little bit less because you have to pay. Actually, no, it doesn't cost you less at all. Sorry, I'm being moronic. But it's a good way to be able to play it from your hand, whereas Luca plays it from the field, from the break zone, sorry. Red 13 will be in your hand to come down to then use the 1 fire to then play another forward into the field. You see where I'm going with this? Then we've got Philia. So, Philia, what a strong card to be able to play. I mean, just paying the 1 fire from Red 13 to bring Philia onto the field to just clear the board and then pass your turn. Philia gets removed from the game, but that's fine because you've cleared the board. Obviously, it's a shame that Philia doesn't get to stick around, but it's still a fantastic way just to be able to reset the board and start the game afresh. Golbez. So, especially at damage 6, you get to search up to 4 cards of cost 2 or less and play any number of drop Archfiends from your hand, but still, just getting 1 card to your hand from the standard EX burst of cost 2 or less and bring it to your hand. Again, Golbez can search you the Red 13 as well if you wanted, but yeah, just being able to play it onto the field, and this is a good example as well, because Red 13, you pay the 1 fire, but then the forward he plays can be of any element, so something like a wind, lightning coming onto the field, perfectly fine. Searches you loads of cards, even better. Gawain. So again, really more value for money. So Gawain coming onto the field searches you a job or a Fire Knight and a Water Knight to your hand. You've paid 1 fire to play Gawain onto the field, and you get 2 cards back to hand. That's excellent value. And also you've got Gawain there if you can maybe give haste or anything like that. Varn. So again, better if you have 5 points of damage or more, but even still, you play Varn onto the field, he reveals the top 5 cards of your deck. If there's a 3 CP forward or less that can be played onto the field, play onto the field. And then, if you're at 5 points of damage, do it again. Again, really good. Now, obviously, Xande is the best one here, because Xande, once he comes down, he never really does much more, apart from just stick around. Maybe he's a good blocker. But yeah, being able to play, especially at damage 5, 3 forwards onto the field for paying 1 CP with red 13. You play red 13, you pay 1/5, bring in Xande, you bring in 3 more forwards. Wow, there's such a big power swing in your favour for paying 3 CP from playing a backup. That's crazy. Fusoya. So again, Fusoya enters the field. You can then choose what your opponent controls, reveal top 2 cards. If you combine their CP value, that in power, break a forward, hopefully. And then you also get those 2 cards to hand as well, which is excellent. Fusoya, one of his drawbacks has always been that he never sticks around long enough anyway, so him getting removed from the game isn't that big of a deal. But hopefully being able to break something when he enters the field is good, and then also getting 2 cards to hand as well. And, you know, if you need to cast a summon out of element, you can do that as well. Dark Fina, again, better at 5 points of damage or more, but still really good regardless. You play Fina onto the field, you can search yourself a summon, or you can just play a summon straight out of hand. If you already have that summon there, that's fantastic. So you can just pay the 1/5 red 13, Dark Fina comes in to then cast any summon. Now obviously it's good because obviously the summon you play, if it's a higher value summon, fantastic, but ultimately you are then getting rid of Fina from your hand and the summon from your hand as well. So ultimately this turn you have played red 13, Dark Fina and the summon, which means that's 3 cards out of hand, which, you know, is good obviously if you're getting lots of stuff out of the off of your opponent's field or is helping you in some way, but still you just need to be cautious of the fact that you may be losing cards from hand and you may actually need those cards to pay for other abilities later. Yield Marsh. So, a lot of people asked this question when they first saw red 13. At the end of the turn, remove it from the game. So, Yield Marsh would attempt to be removed from the game, but then Yield Marsh has the text, if she leaves the field, return her to your hand instead. What happens? Well, what happens is you get to choose, basically. Because her abilities kind of trigger at the same point, you can say, actually, I want Yield Marsh's ability to take precedence, so Yield Marsh just comes back to your hand. Nice. Then we've got Cloud of Darkness. So you play red 13, again just like with Filia, you pay the 1/5 to bring in Cloud of Darkness, you get to do a clean sweep of your opponent's board. The good thing about this is that you actually get to pick which forward you want to keep as well, so you can play Cloud of Darkness onto the field. Obviously at the end of the turn she isn't going to be there anyway, so you don't have to pick her, so she would then break herself, which would then remove herself because of red 13's text, but then the forward that you've already got there, you can then hopefully swing through with if your opponent doesn't have a very good forward left, or, you know, it just evens the playing field. Susano, Lord of the Revel. I mean, yeah, this is again a fantastic card. And funnily enough, when you play Susano onto the field, so if a forward damaged by Susano, Lord of the Revel, is put from the field into the break zone on the same turn, removed from the game instead, so really good. But when Susano, Lord of the Revel, enters the field, select one backup you control, you may put it into the break zone. When you do so, deal a 9,000 damage to all the forwards other than Susano, Lord of the Revel. So, kind of like Filia, has a board-wide sweep effect, but also has haste as well, which is excellent. And funnily enough, you can play red 13, pay the 1/5 to bring in Susano. You can then get rid of red 13 to give him that the damage wide effect, and then hopefully Susano can swing through with haste, and then obviously at the end of the turn he would get removed from the game. Hojo, again, similar to Yield Marsh. What happens when you play this card? So when Hojo enters the field, choose one forward you control, remove it from the game. When you do so, choose one forward in your break zone with a cost inferior to that of the removed forward, play it onto the field. So hypothetically, you could play red 13, bring out something like, I don't know, Filia, who is an 8 CP, and then you play Hojo, which would then remove the Filia to then play something inferior. Now, obviously red 13 states, if it leaves the field for any reason, remove from the game instead. What happens here? Well, it's similar to some monsters or some effects where they state a particular outcome. So Cleone, for example, Cleone states when it gets put from the field into the break zone, or when your opponent casts a summon, put it from the field in the break zone, cancel that summon, draw a card. If Cleone, for any reason, gets put from the field into the break zone, you still get to draw that card because that part of the text is still being fulfilled. And the same applies to Hojo. So when Hojo is played onto the field, you're removing that forward from the game because of red 13's text, but it's still being removed from the game, which fulfills Hojo's effect, which means you can then play a forward of cost inferior. And finally Goblin, because why not Goblin? Put Goblin into the break zone, choose one forward you control, it gains haste until the end of the turn, draw one card. So yeah, I mean this just means that any forward that gets played into the field can gain haste. It's a nice quick and easy way to be able to play it, but also you get a card to hand. Goblin's kind of like, well, it's a monster version of Belias, or Belias, however you want to pronounce it, but it's just nice having that Goblin there sat ready to go, and if your opponent does break it for any reason, chances are it costs them more than it costs you, and Goblin, again, when it gets put into the break zone, you can draw a card, so that's fine as well. But yeah, you pay the 1 for red 13, bringing it forward, put Goblin in the break zone, you get to draw a card, that 4 gains haste, and hopefully has a really good effect on attack as well, maybe. You know, maybe you played 7 CP Sephi onto the field. That's a tongue twister, 7 CP Sephi. Sephiroth, even. He makes your opponent discard 2 cards, you could then give him haste, your opponent has no cards in hand, you can dull and freeze something, potentially. You know, there's lots of cool combos with this, but I think just having Goblin there to give any forward haste and draw you a card as well, really good. Right, next on the roster, Kunshira, a 2 CP Wind Lightning Forward of 9,000 power. Haste, if you control 4 or more backups, Kunshira loses 3,000 power. And the Tempest Spellblade S ability, 1 Wind, 1 Lightning. Activate Kunshira until the end of the turn. All the forwards opponent controls lose 4,000 power, and Kunshira gains first strike, and Kunshira can attack once or more this turn. Once more, so this turn, sorry, not once or more. So yeah, it's one of those cards which is a very good early game, but the more backups you build, obviously not fantastic, but there are ways around it, and ultimately Kunshira is a very good card. I mean, that S ability is just really good to be able to activate, to be able to attack again, and minus 4k to your opponent's board, really, really strong. But yeah, Puck. Obviously, Kunshira has haste, so you can just play Puck onto the field to bring in maybe another 1 CP forward, and Kunshira can then swing through, hopefully. Again, you want to make sure that you don't have 4 or more backups, otherwise you'll lose some power, but still, you know, Puck can be your 3rd backup to bring Kunshira to swing. Golbez, so you play Golbez onto the field, it can search a card of 2 CP or less, Kunshira, you then play Kunshira, you're away. Red Mage! When you cast a summon, you may put Red Mage into the break zone. When you do so, choose 1 forward, of course 3 or less to break it. So you can use this as a bit of a combat trick. Your opponent attacks, you then cast a summon, you put Red Mage into the break zone, you get to break a forward they control, you get the effect of the summon you cast, and then Kunshira can go up in power. So say Red Mage is your 4th backup, you put it in the break zone, you now have 3 backups, Kunshira becomes a 9k forward again, and then you can block with that as well. So just more combat tricks to be able to make Kunshira still very powerful. Crow, similar sort of thing. So when Crow enters, is put from the field into the break zone, choose 1 forward in your break zone, add it to your hand, and then put Crow into the break zone, choose 1 forward, dull it. So you can use this to be able to get your Kunshira back to your hand, to then play her, and hopefully, again, Crow was your 4th backup, so then, you know, Kunshira becomes big, but also it dulls a forward out of the way, so you can play Kunshira onto the field and attack through, because all the blocking forward is now dull. But, you know, you can also use this as well during your opponent's attack phase, something like that. So your opponent goes to attack, use Crow to dull a forward out of the way. You can then get Kunshira back to hand with Kunshira already on the field. Kunshira goes up in power, and then you can use Kunshira's S ability as well. Lulu, so dull, put 1 back up into the break zone, choose 1 forward, deal it 5,000 damage. I mean, this card didn't get much play in Opus 1, but, you know, there's more cards that it can work with these days, especially with something like Garland. So Garland, whenever a backup's put to the field into the break zone, you get to draw a card, so that's pretty good, and you do get 5k to something. So, you know, you can use Lulu to go from 4 backups to 3. Kunshira goes up in power, but also you get to deal 5k to a forward, so maybe your opponent has a huge, like a 12k attacker. You can use Lulu to deal at 5k, and Kunshira will be 9, so it can block and hopefully kill that forward as well. Kane, so again, break a backup, you then get to play Kane onto the field, which will then reduce a forward's power by 8k, which is really good, but also Kunshira can then go up in power as well and hopefully swing through. Nono, when a category 12 forward enters your field, choose 1 backup you control, activate it. It's a 3 CP wind backup. Now, I spoke about this card last week with the Varn combo, so I'm not going to include Varn in this episode, but there's still some I'm not going to include that Varn in this episode, but there's still some really cool combos with this card. And when I saw this card, I was like, this is so good. I love this card. Anyway, so Ash. When Ash enters the field, you may, if you control a job Sky Pirate, draw 1 card. So chances are you probably will. But this basically means that Ash is costing you not much, because you're getting to draw a card off of Ash, provided you control a Sky Pirate, which again you should. But also, then you get to reactivate a backup as well. So let's say you discarded a card and dulled Nono, Ash onto the field, reactivate Nono, draw a card. So you basically just milled yourself 1 card, but that's perfectly fine. again, Ash. But the main reason for this is the fact that this Ash has the ability of, at the beginning of your attack phase, during each of your turns, select up to 2 of the 4 following actions. Draw a card, discard a card, or the waterfall you call, gain 1000 power, choose one character, activate it, or choose one of 4 or less, it loses abilities until the end of the turn. So being able to reactivate a backup you control, really good, because you play Ash onto the field, you get a Nono's activation. You can stack that with something like Chocolate if you wanted to, and then you go to combat. Ash can then reactivate another backup, so you can make it so that Ash effectively only costs you 2 CP, or you can use multiple reactivations of a dull ability on your backups to be able to have some great effect of some sort. And then you've got Ash and Fran, so lots of Ashes here. But this is more just about how recently Wind has been about, well, it's always been about playing lots of cards, but actually casting lots of things to get more cards to hand. So at the end of each of your turns, if you've cast 3 or more cards this turn, draw 1 card. And Fran's text, when Fran enters the field, if you've cast 3 or more cards this turn, draw 1 card. And obviously you can play both these guys onto the field, and you get to reactivate a backup, which means they've only cost you 1 CP each, which is great. So you could play Ash onto the field, reactivate a backup. You could then play something else onto the field, cast a summon, I don't know, Pandemonium, maybe. You can then play Fran onto the field, and then you have cast 3 things, so Fran will then draw you a card to hand. You go to pass your turn, and Ash will draw you a card as well. So it's a great way to be able to keep like the costs very, very minimal for your backups, but also you're drawing lots of cards to hand as well, so you've still got lots of options in hand. Larsa. So Larsa's a fantastic card, but he's very, very playable already, but being able to make it so he's only a 1 CP forward is really, really good. And, you know, when Larsa enters the field, choose 1 card in your damage zone, add it to your hand, put 1 card from your hand into the damage zone. So you're also getting a card, or you're swapping a card out as well, but this is a great way to be able to use your damage as a kind of side hand of sorts, in a weird way, but it's nice to be able to have that last on hand and know that you're going to be able to reactivate a backup, and there may be a high cost card in your damage zone, but because you're reactivating your backups, it then means actually you're still going to be able to cast that card because you've got more CP than you should. Vossler. So if you control a card named